The world's 8 leading industrial powers and 5 emerging nations are pushing for new trading standards. Negotiations, however, have snagged over differences between rich and poor nations. For an update on these talks, Bloomberg's Ryan Chilcote is standing by in L'Aquila, Italy, where the G-8 summit is taking place. He's joined by World Bank President Robert Zoellick, who has recently presented his views on trade to G8 leaders. Ryan?
Yeah, regarding those talks, we have heard the G8 countries and other countries agree to push for completing those the Doha round of the World Trade talks by 2010. Now, as you said, we do have Robert Zoellick, the head of the World Bank, with us. Thank you very much, Bob, for being with us.
Glad to be here.
We heard from the G8, their assessment of the world economy is that it's still too fragile. Is that your assessment?
Yeah, I think financial markets have, hit a little bit of the bottom and come back, and I think restored a little bit of confidence. But if you look at capacity utilization and you look at the unemployment numbers and you look particularly at challenges in the developing world, we've still got some serious risks ahead of us.
Too early, obviously, for exit strategies, sounds like.
Oh, I think, some people are talking about exit strategies, but those that are the poor in the developing world are getting burned up in the house. So,
what's the benchmark? When will it be okay to pull back on stimulus? When will we know? How do we know?
Well, I think you have a different debate. Some people are talking about making sure you continue to use the current stimulus, like the U.S. has only used about 15% of its stimulus. Some are talking about additional stimulus. I think the general sense is people should follow through on what they've done. They got to keep the monetary policies, making sure that credit is flowing. But until you start to get a sense that the economy has taken hold in the private sector, not just on the government side, you've got various types of risks. Now, it's a global crisis, so you have to look around the world. Different challenges in banking systems, different parts. Depends if protectionism breaks out. So part of what I see as the challenge is to identify the risks in the world and try to manage them to reduce them.
Well, it sounds like I know this answer, but there's a lot of talk in the United States about a second stimulus program. Is it too early for that?
Well, as I said, I think you've only had 15% spent of the first one. So I would follow through on the first one. And frankly, the balance you have to strike is that if it looks like the government is spending too much money forever, then you're going to start to create uncertainty about fiscal discipline.
What do you think about the effectiveness of how it's being spent? And we've heard a lot of criticism that there should have been more money put into infrastructure right away.
One of the leaders at the meeting made a point that said that, the officials always come and want more money spent, but it always takes more time to spend it than they wish. And so I think people need to know this when they get these stimulus programs, that this is built in. These projects are never shovel ready. But I think that, the amount that was set aside is a reasonable amount, and now they got to use it.
You heard the pledge to complete the WTO trade talks by 2010. Can they do it?
Yeah, it's doable. As Pascal Lamy, the Director General of the WTO, said, and he used to be my colleague when I was a trade negotiator, that they probably have about 80% of the work done. But sometimes the last 20% is the hardest. It broke down last year. So if they set a deadline like 2010, what that means in real terms is it gives Director General Lamy some leverage to convene ministers later this year and start to work through the remaining issues. So it broke down over India and the United States, but that isn't all the key issues. You've got issues related to manufacturing, getting the service industry, but this is doable, so I think it's good they keep the heat on. And, one of the best offenses against protectionism is to be opening markets. So I always feel the best defense is a good offense. That's a good move.
And I want to ask you about currencies. We've heard some people say that there are major currency imbalances out there, in particular talking about the dollar and the pound as under threat. What do you think about that?
Well, I do think that you have great imbalances in the system that are related to some of the issues that probably caused this crisis, related to some countries building very large reserves and the United States being very reliant on consumption, and that's not going to continue. But in terms of the dollar itself, I think the dollar is going to remain the primary reserve currency.
We heard the Russian president say that it's not fair for countries like Russia to be held hostage, is the way he put it, to the dollar. What do you think about that?
Well, I think the decisions that are made about reserve currencies aren't done by a series of leaders at a meeting. They're done by the currency that people decide to hold and what people decide to hold in their reserves. But I do think there's a caution that these comments raise for the United States that's valid, which is the United States has been lucky to have the dollar as a reserve currency. You can't take that for granted, and that means you got to run good fiscal and monetary policies.
We got like 30 seconds for one last question about food security. You always hear about it. Really what we're talking about is people having access to food and being able to afford it. I understand we're going to hear about food security and some new programs here. What can we expect?
Well, I think first there has to to have an important focus on malnutrition. There's still about 1 billion people very hungry in the world, so we got to focus on programs like the World Food Program. But what I think President Obama is going to be trying to push with the support of the Canadians, the Italians, European Commission, is to try to add agricultural productivity and production improvements in sub-Saharan Africa, and that could be very important.
Last question, very quickly. What would you like to see achieved at the next G20 in Pittsburgh?
Well, I'd like to see some of the focus turn particularly to the challenges of the developing world. Follow through on the food security, make sure that we help them with their financing issues, support them on trade. So the first round in London was stabilize the system. Second round through this meeting has got to focus on the poorest.
Bob Zoellick, thank you very much. That was, of course, Bob Zoellick, the head of the World Bank, joining us there. I'm going to pass it right back to you.
Thank you very much, Ryan. That is Bloomberg's Ryan Chilcote interviewing the president of the World Bank, Robert Zoellick.